This week, we're going to discuss implementation projects. Now, this is kind of a unique subject when it comes to sustainability. There's usually a lot of focus on the technology, the environmental problems, and the environmental solutions. However, it's very important that we take a moment to consider how to implement these proposed solutions, because the technical problem is in many ways the simple problem. Humans are really good at solving technical problems. However, there are other elements to our predicament that create the circumstances we're in. And so what we're going to talk about today are a few ideas about how to go about implementing sustainability projects. So here we go with our presentation of the day, project implementation strategies. And you can see our graphic there on the title page showing some dollar signs and some people working together in order to try to bring our bright ideas into fruition. Now, if you recall, when we discuss sustainability, we have this concept of the triple bottom line. And this really comes into play in a conversation about the implementation of sustainability. It's not enough to just look at the environment alone or the planet, because we need to think about solutions that are good for the planet. However, we recognize that there are other factors at play that are creating the problems. In particular, it's people. How do we all get along? How do we all have the same perspectives or the same goals, at least enough so that we can decide to work together? There's economics at play. There's only so many resources. There's only so much time. So how do we agree to focus on something at all? And how does that thing we focus on become something that's good for the environment? There's politics. There's all sorts of difficult to quantify variables, things that we have to consider when we talk about trying to make something happen. So what we're going to talk about today is just a few techniques and ideas related to implementing these sustainability projects. You may find in your world that you attract people who say, why don't you? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Oh, you're interested in the environment. Why don't you do X, Y, or Z? And it's very common that we think that the hard part is coming up with the ideas. But really, that's the easiest part. It's not a lack of ideas that holds us back. At any given moment, there are hundreds of possible things we could do. And so there's a long list. The challenge is narrowing that list down to something that we can all agree is worth prioritizing and actually putting our time and effort toward. So here we see some photos showing plenty of types of projects that a school in particular, who's hoping to implement sustainability, they might look into all these sorts of things. Some are technologies, some are expensive, some are people, organizational things, some are maintenance related. And how do you know where to begin? And how do you know how to manage those projects? Well, let's talk about that here. One influential piece of work is an essay that was published by an author named Donella Meadows. And this person is a scientist and a system analyst. And they have a focused bit of research on environmental limits to economic growth. And Donella Meadows has identified 12 possible leverage points on where you can intervene in a system. And this is kind of interesting because these are places you could intervene in nature or even on a human kind of social system. And this framework is used quite a bit when we look at organizational change. And it's quite complex and maybe difficult to understand, but I just want you to look at this diagram below. We've got a system. You could think of it like a really heavy rock. We want to move that system into a direction of change. How do we do it? Well, there's the metaphor of a lever. If we get a lever and a fulcrum, we can use our energy wisely, and we can move heavy objects with minimal effort. So using this metaphor of a lever, there are different areas in which we can act in order to have leverage. And so if we go close to the system, close to the fulcrum, we start in areas that have less leverage. And these are things like adjusting the numbers, the parameters, the rules, the structure of how resources are stored and how they flow, trying to minimize delay, or looking at feedback loops. Again, these are complex ideas that each of them you would need to define further for it to fully make sense. But then let's compare some of the specific things on the left to the areas on the right with the greatest leverage. So if we can look at the structure, the goal, or the paradigm, the worldview that is used to create the goal, if we can somehow change that, then all the other things that happen will take care of themselves. So there's kind of this emphasis when we want to change a system is we want to identify, okay, what are the leverage points in this system? What are the things we can change? And how do we try to go with those that give us the greatest leverage so that if we focus on changing these one or two things, then other good things happen naturally as a result. This same thought process applies to ecological restoration, just as it does to organizational structure. It's kind of interesting to consider. So if we want to take that concept, which is a bit abstract, and make it a little bit more definite, we can put it into a framework for organizational change. And this is my framework for organizational change, and I'm inspired by many resources. And so I'll cite those and share those as we go along. But if you want any number of items, I've curated the list for you here. This is Mark's organizational change framework, inspired by many others in the world. So we want to start with the goals. Just like we saw in the previous slide, we have more leverage if we have focus on planning for sustainability. So we need to establish sustainability goals. And then we want to link our strategies, the things that are going to help us achieve the goal, we want to link them to the best practice. So we figure out what we want to do exactly, and then we look and see who else is out there doing this, and how do we link our strategies to the best practices that are out there. And then once we have a list of those best practices, we want to prioritize projects and processes that will enable more projects and processes. And this is where we might consider things to be the low-hanging fruit. Maybe if we do this one thing, it will help other things to happen. Then along the way, we want to measure and show the results. And finally, we want to celebrate the success. Now, this is a framework that you can apply to almost anything in life, and it's quite helpful to remember these 5 things. We want to think about the goal. We want to do some research and try to do what is the best practice out there. We want to focus on those things that are going to have the greatest leverage. We want to show our results along the way as well as at the end. And we want to celebrate our success. We want to congratulate the people who did the work, and we want to encourage others to get involved and make it look like it's fun. All of this can be summarized into a very popular business management, organizational management framework called the PDCA Cycle. And very simply, you plan, do, check, and then act. So any project or any idea, it starts with a plan, and then you implement, and then you check to make sure that it was good, and then you take your next action to either adjust or lead into your next plan. And it's a cycle, meaning that it's never ending. It's continuous. You just keep on planning, doing, checking, adjusting, and then that goes into your next plan. And it sounds quite simple. It actually is very simple, but it's surprising how difficult it is to implement. It's so people get so caught up in the day-to-day activities, getting things done, that it's hard to take the time to plan. It's even harder to take the time to check, to review, to verify that what we're doing is working. But it's the most important step in the process in order to keep that cycle continuously moving around. So when we focus on planning, it starts with a broad plan and what many organizations call a strategic plan. And this is where we start with the big general ideas. Who are we? What do we want to do? How do we get together to make things happen? And you turn that into something very specific and actionable. A strategic plan has a bunch of different steps in the process, but it's very important for an organization to go through a strategic planning process to know where it's going to go in the future. And a strategic plan is, above all else, a communication tool for the stakeholders, the people inside the organization and the people outside, in order to help everyone understand where we're trying to go and why we should allocate those resources, time and money, toward the best areas. A plan is good. However, it's never going to be 100% perfect. Nothing goes according to plan, but you still need one. And implementing the plan is going to be vastly more difficult than developing the plan. And remember, it's very different to participate in the planning process than it is to be handed a finished plan. So more than anything, this is a tool to get everyone together in the same room, or metaphorically, could be a Zoom room. And we want to help everyone feel like they're involved in deciding where things need to go. Out of a strategic plan comes some general things: a vision statement, a mission statement. And in general, a vision statement is a large-scale direction of future desired outcomes. What are we going to do, and who do we want to be? What change do we want to make in the world? And I like to think of it like, what is going to put you out of business? If you're trying to do something in the world, what would it look like if it was no longer necessary? So a sustainable vision would be something like, we are 100% sustainable. Every bit of energy is renewable. We have zero waste, and everybody is getting better all the time. Something like that. And if that was true, then you wouldn't need to exist to create a sustainability action plan now, would you? So it's like, what does the end look like? What's your vision? The mission is more specific. It describes the purpose of the organization. And it's basically like, yeah, there's the vision over there, but who are we and what do we do in order to make that vision a reality. And it's a good idea to kind of get everyone to know what the mission is, because it's almost a good sort of barometer of an organization, a good test of the strength of an organization, to ask yourself how many people know the mission and could recite it. If you ask them, hey, what's the mission? Do the people who are cleaning the restrooms, do the people who are emptying the trash at the organization, do they understand why they are there every day and how what they're doing is contributing to something important? They should. It's also a good idea to have personal vision and mission statements. And you want to make sure that your individual idea of where you want to go is in line with the organization. And you should be encouraging the people in an organization to be thinking individually as well as collectively. Then you consider all of your stakeholders. These are all the people or the groups that have an interest or can affect the organization. This could be these could be your customers. These could be the community in which you do business. Could be the competition. It could be anyone who invests or supports. It could be the people who supply you with the resources. And so depending on the group or who's involved, there's many different types of stakeholders. These are people who, in one way or another, are affected or can have an impact on your organization. And once you consider all of these stakeholders, you should talk to them first of all. But even if they're not 100% part of your plan, you should include them into your plan because they're important. And you should figure out what they need, and you should figure out what they want, or in other words, what they value. And so when it comes to considering your stakeholders, needs are any actions that you must take in order to accommodate your stakeholders. And the values are actions that you should take in order to please your stakeholders. An example would be law, the legal regulations. Certain things are mandatory and they must be followed. And that would be a need of the government that regulates your organization. You must follow the law. But there are other things that are not necessarily required, but good practices that that same organization or entity, the law, would like to see. And so it's important to understand exactly what you need to do, but then also how to go above and beyond and to create a positive value for your stakeholders. Because if you can consider that from the beginning, then the types of solutions you come up with are going to already be more likely to be successful. And then next, you list all of your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It's kind of like a brainstorm, and you can ask your stakeholders to give you their idea on your strengths and weaknesses. And this is what a lot of times people call a SWOT analysis. SWOT, SWOT analysis. And if you think of these four things, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, you can really get a good picture on an organization, exactly where you are and how you want to get to the future. And more than just thinking about these four items, it's really helpful to consider this as a matrix. What do I mean by matrix? I mean a grid. Like the image here shows, we can arrange the strengths and weaknesses into positive and negative things, and those are internal to the organization. You have an inherent strength, you have an inherent weakness. And then there's external. The external positive things are your opportunities. The external harmful things are the threats. And so thinking in this way helps you to sort of automatically prioritize where to make some changes. So once a planning team comes up with a list of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, they can be analyzed in a number of ways, but usually it involves putting them in some kind of categories that are related to each other, as you can see in the two tables we have here. And you can notice that the opportunities, threats, strengths, and weaknesses naturally will lead towards certain strategies. And so if you look on the right-hand side, that matrix becomes another layer deep where we can use strengths to take advantage of opportunities, overcome weaknesses by taking advantage of opportunities, use strengths to avoid threats, minimize weaknesses, and avoid threats. Kind of just helps you to understand a little bit higher level thinking involving who you are and where you want to go. And then all of that gets turned into an action plan. Now, an action plan is where you have your goals and your strategies for meeting the goals, but it can be very simple. It can be as simple as who does what by when. Who's going to do something? What are they going to do? And when are they going to do it? Now, typically, we want these goals to be SMART. SMART is an acronym that stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. And so it should have these characteristics that make them good goals. It should include a deadline by when, and it should include who's the person responsible for doing this. And all of that gets included into an action plan. And for example, we can have a sustainability action plan based on sort of this kind of strategic planning framework. And if you find it familiar that what you're working on in this class is a piece of a potential sustainability action plan, maybe you can start to understand that even students and people learning have a valuable role to play in helping organizations, especially schools, to advance toward sustainability. When we look at an action plan in further detail, they can be broken down in different terms. Some people use these terms differently, but basically you've got goals, strategies, objectives, and tactics, and you might organize them slightly differently, but it doesn't really matter which one you use where. However, here's what I propose for you. A goal is a broad primary outcome. So what's your goal? It should be specific, and we should know who's going to do what by when. But then, okay, you've got a goal. How are you going to achieve the goal? And so you've got a strategy that is the approach you take to achieve a goal. Of course, that strategy should be informed by your stakeholders, by your SWOT analysis, needs, values, and ultimately your mission and vision. Under each of your strategies or your approaches, there's objectives. Those are measurable steps that you take to achieve a strategy. And then finally, you may have tactics, which would be a tool that you use to pursue an objective associated with a strategy. Basically, it's a way to break down something a little bit more general into something very specific. Let's look at an example. Let's say you have a goal to increase your profit by 10% each year for 5 years in a row. Now notice that's a very good goal. It's specific, it's measurable, it may or may not be realistic or achievable. I guess it's possible to achieve. It's not an impossible thing. And it's timely. So it's very clear at the end of 5 years, did you do it or did you not do it? Now, it's one strategy to achieve the goal might be to expand your marketing efforts on social media. There could be many other strategies to achieve the same goal. This is just one possible strategy. Okay, so that's a great idea. It's a little bit more detailed, but it still doesn't tell you exactly what to do. So the objectives might be, okay, we're going to open accounts on various social media platforms. We're going to post at least once per week. We're going to collect metrics on our market reach. Now it's starting to make sense exactly how you're going to do this thing to try ultimately to increase your profit. And what would be a tactic? Well, let's hire a marketing consultant to provide training and develop a marketing plan that we can follow. And this is something that businesses do all the time. This is a business example. However, this same concept would be the approach we would take to writing a sustainability plan within an organization. And ultimately, you end up with a plan that can be even visually expressed, that we've got our vision that we're working toward. We're relying on a mission to help us get there. We've got some very good goals that are what we focus on to achieve the mission, and the strategies and objectives that help us get the goals accomplished. So that's the planning part of the PDCA cycle. Let's focus now on implementation. And when we think about implementing, we tend to focus on two kinds of efforts. One is projects. Okay, we want to improve sustainability. What do? We need a project. And the project is an individual, discrete effort, usually something that has a start and a finish. The other thing that people should focus on are processes. And processes are continuous. There's never going to be an end to your process. And so the greatest success comes from having enough focus on both projects and processes, and leveraging both projects and processes to make things easier and easier over time. Let's take a look at some examples of this. When we're going to do a project, it is the best practice to start small. And how do you start small? You do a pilot. They call it a pilot project. So this is like a mini version of your project. And in this miniature version, you can make a lot of mistakes and learn many lessons, but they're not going to be expensive or take a lot of time because it's a small project. So the pilot project is a very important and useful tool for making big change in an organization. So how do you do a pilot project? Well, it has its own planning process. Look at the defining the stakeholders and creating a scenario and having a roadmap with goals and success criteria. And so we have our own planning, doing, checking, and acting cycle, but it's a small version. And if we can have a successful pilot, then that gives good reason to make that thing bigger. But if the pilot is not successful, then it helps you understand, okay, maybe we should focus our attention somewhere else. Pilot projects are very important. And then if we're going to focus on processes, what do? Well, this is a continuously improving sort of a situation. And when we have these continuous improvement scenarios, it's easy to focus on small, little incremental changes. And if we do that, then it adds up to big results. And this is a process that we call continuous improvement. And it's actually quite simple. And it simply comes from fixing what bugs you every day. And you can take something that's good and you can always make it better. This sort of thinking comes from the manufacturing world. In particular, it kind of had its origins in car manufacturing, in particular with Toyota. They're credited with developing the Toyota production system that focuses on things like lean manufacturing, where you eliminate all the waste in order to improve a process and add value to the customer. When we focus on the elimination of waste in a process, it's kind of different than how we think about environmental waste and pollution. However, there's some similarities, but there's additional types of waste, as you can see in the diagram, and as we'll see here. Overproduction of whatever you're doing. If you make too much of it, that's waste in your process. If you overprocess it, meaning if you make it better than it needs to be, if you move it around too much, if there's any waiting involved, if you have to transport it from one place to another before it's finished, if you have extra inventory, meaning you just have too many things sitting around that go into the creation of whatever you're trying to do. If you make mistakes, you have to redo all of the defects. And finally, unused employee potential. If you don't use the creativity and inspiration of all the people on a team, that's a waste as well. Now, I think it's kind of interesting to think of waste in this other way, and how might we consider these elements of waste in our sustainability projects and our process improvement. Now, anytime you have a group of people, a business, an organization, it's important that you have the support from all the people. And there's different levels. There's actually, positions of power in organizations. They may be informal or they may be formal. And you really need the support from all of them. You need to have the support from the bottom, the grassroots. In a school, this would be the students, the building managers, the facilities staff, the project managers, the custodians, the people who do the purchasing. We need their support. They can bring the capacity to get it done. And if they're encouraged by sustainability, then everyone will be encouraged by sustainability. But then we also need the people at the top, the president, the provost, dean, VPs. We need them to also buy in. We need them to say, yes, this is important. That brings the authority, the official capacity. If it's something that you're trying to do at the grassroots, but the top level they don't care about it, it's going to be harder to make it happen. So we need to get the grassroots on board, and we need to get the top level leadership on board. And then finally, there's the middle management or the upper middle management. In an organization, these would be like the C-suite, they call it, the CFO, chief financial operator, the chief operating officer, any vice presidents, any deans of a college. These are the people that will help to integrate our systems, meaning we already do things a certain way, and if we're going to make a change, we need to change a lot of little processes. And so how will it affect the way we do contracting or finance, accounting, purchasing? We need all those people to give their professional opinion. And that way we've got the people who are on the ground doing the work, the people at the top who are making the decisions, and the people in the middle who are helping to implement at a complex organization. It's the same with government. It's the same with a community or a society. However, an organization, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit, is where a lot of this type of thinking takes place. Now, speaking of implementation, remember our triple bottom line. If we don't consider the economics, well, then it won't be possible. And so we do want to have a profitability analysis for any type of project we implement. It's important to know how much is this going to cost in the beginning and how much is this going to cost over time. Now, a profitability analysis is looking at the financial feasibility of a new project. And we bring in a concept from economics, this concept of a return on investment. A lot of times they just call it the ROI, return on investment. And the idea is I have to pay some money or some time to get something done. What is it going to pay me back? And that's an important thing to consider. What is the return on investment? And the simplest form of an ROI is called simple payback. And here's an example of simple payback. A lighting improvement project is going to cost $1,000. The improvement will save $500 each year. What is the simple payback period? So it's a simple bit of math. You do the cost, you divide it by the savings per year to understand your simple payback period. So if we're going to look at the example above, it's going to cost $1,000 to implement this project, but it will save $500 per year. So that means we have a simple payback period of 2 years. In 2 years' time, it will have paid for itself. Now, if the lights are going to last more than 2 years, then you say, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But if the lights don't last for 2 years, you have to change them sooner than that, then it wouldn't make sense, financial sense. It's not financially feasible. And if you did this analysis to a couple different projects, you could try to find the one that has the best payback and focus on your highest return on investment first. Now, this simple payback period, it's called simple because it doesn't take into account many other types of factors like time. For example, if we did this project today, it will cost $1,000. But if we wait and in 5 years we try to do the same project, it might cost $2,000 because in the future, with inflation and prices and technology, things may change. And so we want to always be thinking about the time value of money too. But the bare minimum of a return on investment is simply just looking at the payback period, simple payback. And just this tool alone is a very valuable way to make decisions on prioritizing which projects to start and which processes to improve. So remember, you go and you research the best management practices. So what are some of the best management practices for implementing sustainability in organizations? Well, it's to develop an internal committee or an office. It needs to be somebody's job to get this done. And it needs to be somebody's job to help facilitate planning also. However, almost everybody needs to be involved in some way or another, but it's really good if you can give this job to somebody. And the sustainability office or the sustainability committee is the group that is formed. It can be comprised of all the important people, community members, all the stakeholders, and they are the ones who come up with the goals, objectives, desired outcomes. They're the ones who create and maintain the action plan, who measure and monitor the performance. They do the research of the best practices. They acquire the funding. They implement the programs, and they share the success. So you need to, if it's not somebody's job, it's going to be hard to get it done. And then what is one of the best management practices for implementing sustainability at an organization is what's called a revolving loan fund. And here is the most powerful tool, in my personal opinion, for organizational change. It's a hard one to get done. It's a hard one to convince people to do. But if you can get it done, then sustainability is going to really almost be impossible to not happen. It's going to happen no matter what. And basically what you do is you create a little loan inside the organization. So you dedicate some money in the budget to sustainability. It could be a small amount. That's okay. But you also commit within the organization that any money you save from sustainability efforts is going to be put into this loan fund so that all your future projects are paid for by the previous projects and the money you saved. This is a very powerful tool and concept. It's a method for funding all of your projects. So here's where you take your ROI, the return on investment, your simple payback calculations. The thing that gives you the greatest payback, the greatest return on investment, is the thing that you do first. And these are the things that we call the low-hanging fruit. So our profitability analysis helps us understand what's the low-hanging fruit. And there's an image here that kind of illustrates low-hanging fruit. So we could do the color of the building. We could paint the roof white. If we paint the roof white, it's going to reflect a lot more sunlight. It's very cheap and easy to paint the roof white. And we can see an immediate savings in our energy bill with the amount of air conditioning we need to do. That's very different than the fruit at the top, the photovoltaics, the solar panels. Solar panels are expensive. So first we reduce the energy we need to consume, and then we go move up the tree. And how are you going to pay for the solar panels? Well, you're already paying for the air conditioning. And so if you can reduce your air conditioning cost, but then any amount of savings, you hang on to that for future projects, eventually you get a system where all of the previous projects are paying for the next project. And you use that to help you make decisions. And more importantly, it helps you to fund these types of things. So the revolving loan fund is like a secret. It's the best way out there in order to save the money up to pay, to finance all of these possible projects. It takes the commitment of the leadership at the top that they won't take that money for something else. So any money saved on sustainability needs to stay in sustainability. That's important. Establishing a baseline is one of the ways to determine if your project is successful or not. So a lot of times you don't know what the baseline is. How much energy do you use every year based on your air conditioning? A lot of people don't know. So one of the first things you normally do is you establish a baseline. What do we currently do? And one way to do that is to then do an audit, an energy audit, a water audit, a waste audit. You get people out there. It can be teams. It can be, you could hire someone to do the work, or you could have students or, your own people. The committee could do the work. You go around and you count. You count all the light bulbs. You count how much energy you're using. You dump out the trash cans. You look at how much is recyclable, how much is this or that. You actually go and see, and you write it down, and you come up with a baseline. That baseline is useful for helping to create the next goal and also for helping to measure your savings. So you need to have a baseline. You get the baseline by doing the audit. So the audit should be one of the first practices that people do within an organization to help implement sustainability. Another best management practice is to look at your processes and try to think like an ecosystem. In an ecosystem, there's no waste, so everything is consumed by something else. So after doing the audit and seeing how everything operates, you try to connect any resources that are not being used or any waste. You try to see if it could be used somewhere else. So here's an example showing a couple different industries, but there starts with a brewery. The brewery takes in water and takes in grain, but then they give off wastewater and the old spent grain. Instead of going to the landfill causing pollution, those spent grains and the wastewater can be filtered, and part of the solid stuff can go to feed animals. The liquid stuff can go to a digester, which the digester can produce energy, gas, or even material for other things. And notice how the more you connect the dots, now all of these potential processes are enabled by what was once a problem, a waste. But that waste can become the food for a lot of things. Any organization will have this type of a opportunity, but it will look different in every place. Even the local government, the city could think about this whole mapping process on an entire regional scale, and really on a global scale, we can think of this too. So a best management practice is to look for the waste and think about how can it connect to other products or processes within the organization or at least locally in order to fuel another thing. And this is what we could call a zero emission process, or even sometimes referred to as the circular economy. Another best management practice is to monitor and display publicly the data, the metrics. It's very important that it's public. When it's public, it gives people, everybody, an opportunity to pay attention. And the more people pay attention, the more they're going to be wanting to help. And there's a little bit of a competitive nature in everybody. If your numbers are shown every month and you notice that another department or another neighborhood has better numbers than you, well, then there's going to be maybe a little healthy competition that goes on, and everyone's going to want to make their number the best. And so we need to monitor and we need to know what the numbers are. But even more importantly, we need to display those numbers publicly. We need to advertise them, make them known to the people who matter, and let them know if they're doing good or if they could improve. And that helps to encourage everyone to improve. And then finally, we want to award success. We want to celebrate success. And one way to do this in an organization, especially a large company or an institution, is to have a competition with a true award. And here we see a photo of what they did at Harvard University, which is one place where I've taken a lot of this information in this talk. At Harvard University, they have a lot of kitchens, different cafeterias and restaurants for all the different buildings and different groups of people. And so they wanted to improve the sustainability of the kitchen. So if you come in and you just say, hey, you must do this, you must do that, that doesn't sound very fun. Nobody wants to follow extra rules. But if you do the same thing and say, hey, there's a competition and the winner gets an award, in this case, you can see the image. They're holding up a picture of the award. They just took a skillet a little frying pan, and they spray painted it green, and whoever does the best each year gets to keep the green skillet. And it's now something you can brag about, and something you can have pride over, is that our team, we won the green skillet. Very simple, very cheap to implement. But psychologically, that gets everybody more encouraged to participate, get on board. So competitions are good, and more importantly, awards. We want to celebrate the success. We want to make other people jealous and help them to see that, hey, I want to get involved in something like this. This is something that really looks exciting and is fun, and I can make a difference. So this is a key piece. It seems like it's maybe a little bit more optional, or maybe it's not really doing the work. However, this is the people component of people, planet, profit. We need to consider the people who do the work, and we need to incentivize, give them a reason to care. And it can be something silly, it can be something fun. And if you do that, more and more people will be likely to join. You have a higher chance of success. So there we go, with just a kind of general overview of the planning process and how we might think about implementing sustainability. Each of these kind of subjects within subjects would have its own long list of things to learn and experience to gain. But one of the things people do after studying sustainability is become something called a sustainability professional. This is an important world. You get really passionate. I like this subject. What can I do? Well, there is a whole industry out there of people, certified sustainability professionals, and they go into companies, they go into organizations, they help implement the sustainability action plan, and then figure out how to determine the best projects to work on, and how to set up the revolving loan fund, and how to take the data, do the baseline, do a business case for sustainability, figure out your ROI, and then establish your metrics, share the success, and ultimately how to make sustainability an institutional effort, how to make it the kind of thing that continues after you step away. And for the right person out there, it's a wonderful job. It's very important. It can be very satisfying. And it's one way that individuals can make a huge difference, is by helping other individuals get on board to work toward sustainability, individually as well as a group, as an organization, as a business, as a region, as a government, and eventually as a society and a globe, because we know we need to act in this way. As I said in the beginning, there's a million solutions out there. The problem is not coming up with good ideas. The hard part is figuring out how to implement those ideas. And I hope that this week's lesson gives you a little bit more food for thought, a little bit more of an idea on how you might go about implementing your sustainability projects. Thanks a lot.